The pawn shop's fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm of angry wasps, their cold glare exposing every crack in my resolve as I clutched my mother's ring, the last piece of her I hadn't lost to hospital bills. At 28, I stood in a Seattle pawn shop, my damp coat clinging to my shoulders from the relentless drizzle outside, and realized I was selling more than gold. I was selling my pride. The ring, a simple band with a single emerald, had been Mom's treasure, worn through decades of love and loss. Now it was my lifeline, the only thing standing between me and eviction from the crumbling studio apartment I'd rented after fleeing Idaho. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew your sins before you confessed them. My parents raised me with iron rules. No dating, no dreams beyond marriage and modesty, no questioning the church's grip. Mom's death when I was 20 shattered that cage, but it left me guarded, my heart locked behind vows of self-reliance. I'd never let a man close, not after watching Mom's faith in love crumble under Dad's quiet neglect. I came to Seattle chasing a library job, a chance to rebuild. But the offer vanished when the branch's funding was cut. Now, 3 months. Later, I was jobless, penniless, and standing in a pawn shop that smelled of mildew and desperation. The clerk, a wiry man with a stained sweater, barely glanced at the ring. $50, he muttered, sliding it back across the counter. My stomach twisted. 50 wouldn't cover a week's rent, let alone food. I opened my mouth to protest when the door chime cut me off. A man stepped inside, his presence swallowing the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, he wore a tailored charcoal suit that screamed wealth. But his face, sharp jaw, dark eyes shadowed with exhaustion, carried something heavier. He was older, maybe mid-40s, with streaks of silver in his dark hair. The clerk straightened, suddenly attentive. "Problem here?" the man asked, his voice low, precise, like he was used to being obeyed. His gaze flicked to the ring, then to me, and I felt pinned, as if he could see every failure etched into my bones. "No problem," I said, shoving the ring into my pocket. I was leaving. I turned for the door, heart pounding, but his hand caught the counter's edge, blocking my path without touching me. The air crackled with something I couldn't name. Danger, curiosity, or both. "That ring," he said, eyes narrowing. "Where did you get it?" "It's mine," I snapped, hating how my voice shook. "Family heirloom." He tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he'd already solved. "That's no heirloom. It's a custom piece, made for a specific family. My family." His tone wasn't accusing, but it carried a weight that made my knees weak. "I'm Elias Warden, and I'd like to know why you're trying to pawn my mother's ring." My breath caught. Elias Warden. The name was a whisper in Seattle's elite circles, a reclusive shipping magnate who owned half the city's ports and stayed out of the spotlight. I'd seen his name on cranes and warehouses, a ghost behind the city's pulse. How could my mother's ring, her simple, worn band, belong to his world? "You're mistaken," I said, clutching my coat tighter. "This was my mother's. She wore it every day until she died." His expression didn't soften, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or pain. "Then we need to talk, not here." He glanced at the clerk, who shrank back and gestured toward the door. "My office. Now." I should have walked away. Every instinct screamed to run, to protect the ring and the last shred of my independence. But his gaze held me, steady and unyielding, and I saw something beneath it. A crack in his control. A hint of urgency that wasn't just about the ring. My rent was due in 3 days. I had no job, no prospects. And this man, this stranger, might hold answers about my mother I'd never dared to seek. "Fine," I said, lifting my chin. "But I'm not giving you the ring." His lips twitched, not quite a smile. "I wouldn't ask you to." He opened the door, and the drizzle swallowed us as we stepped into the gray Seattle morning. His Office was a fortress of glass and steel, perched atop a waterfront tower overlooking Puget Sound. The elevator ride was silent, my damp sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Elias didn't speak, but his presence filled the space, his broad frame casting a shadow that felt both protective and suffocating. When we reached his office, a stark expanse of dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows, he gestured to a leather chair. I sat, clutching my bag, the ring burning a hole in my pocket. "Tell me about your mother," he said, leaning against his desk, arms crossed. No preamble, no warmth, just a demand wrapped in quiet intensity. I hesitated, my guard up. She was private, raised me alone after my dad left. She never talked about her past, just said the ring was her anchor. I swallowed, the ache of her loss sharp. "Why do you think it's yours?" He reached into a drawer and pulled out a faded photograph. A woman, maybe 30, with my mother's eyes, wore an identical ring. My heart stuttered. "This is my mother," he said, voice tight. "She gave that ring to someone she loved, someone who disappeared." The room spun. My mother tied to his. It was impossible. Yet the ring in my pocket felt heavier, a secret I hadn't known I carried. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Neither do I," he said, his gaze locking onto mine. "But you're not leaving until we figure it out." I wanted to bolt, to keep my mother's memory safe from this man and his world of wealth and control. But the photograph, the ring, the questions, they tethered me to him. And then he said, "I have a guest suite here. Stay. Help me trace this. I'll cover your expenses." It wasn't charity. It was a transaction, one that promised answers but demanded I step into his world. I thought of my empty apartment, the eviction notice taped to my door. I thought of Mom, her secrets buried with her. Independence was all I had, but answers might be worth more. "I'll stay," I said, voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "But I'm not your employee. This is temporary." His eyes held mine, unreadable. "Temporary," he agreed. But the word felt like a challenge. I followed him down a hallway to a sleek guest suite, the city sprawling below like a map of my uncertainty. The ring stayed in my pocket, a fragile link to my past, and now, to him. I was in his world, but I swore I'd keep my heart my own. The guest suite in Elias Warden's tower was a cage of luxury, all polished wood and soft linens, with a view of Puget Sound that mocked my small-town roots. I'd been there 3 days, each one a tightrope walk between guarding my heart and unraveling the mystery of my mother's ring. Elias had given me access to his family's archives, boxes of letters, photos, and ledgers from his shipping empire. But he watched me like a hawk, his dark eyes catching every flinch, every pause. I told myself it was about the ring, about answers, but the air between us crackled with something I refused to name. I spent mornings in his office, sifting through documents while he worked at his desk, a wall of silence between us. He was 43, I'd learned, a man who'd built his fortune from nothing after his father's empire crumbled. The city called him reclusive, ruthless, but I saw cracks in that armor. The way his fingers lingered on his mother's photo, the faint tremor in his voice when he spoke of her disappearance. He didn't trust easily, and neither did I, but the ring, our shared puzzle, kept us tethered. That morning, I found a letter in his mother's handwriting, dated 1992, the year before I was born. "To my love, I'll wear your ring always, but I can't stay." My breath caught. The words mirrored my mother's stories of a fleeting romance, a man she'd never named. I glanced at Elias, his head bent over a laptop, unaware of the storm building in my chest. I wanted to show him, to demand answers, but fear stopped me. What if this tied our past too closely? What if it broke the fragile distance I needed to keep? Instead, I pushed the letter aside and stood, my chair scraping the floor. His eyes flicked up, sharp and searching. "Find something?" he asked, voice low. "Nothing useful," I lied, hating how my pulse raced under his gaze. I crossed to the window, needing air, needing space. The city sprawled below, indifferent to my turmoil. Why do you care so much about this ring? You could buy 1,000 like it. He leaned back, his suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders. It's not about money. It's about closure. My mother vanished when I was 12. That ring was the last thing she gave away before she left. I need to know why. His honesty disarmed me. A glimpse of the boy he'd been, abandoned and angry. I wanted to push back, to keep my walls up, but my own loss echoed his. My mom never talked about her past, I said, voice barely above a whisper. She raised me alone, said the ring kept her strong. I didn't know it was a secret until you. He stood, closing the distance between us, stopping just short of too close. His presence was warm, solid, and I hated how it steadied me. Then we're both chasing ghosts, he said, but you're not alone in it now. The words hung there, heavy with meaning I wasn't ready to face. I stepped back, clutching the letter in my pocket. I need coffee, I muttered, fleeing to the kitchen down the hall. That night, a storm rolled in, rain lashing the tower's windows. I couldn't sleep, the letter's words looping in my mind. I slipped into the office, hoping to find more clues. But the power flickered, plunging the room into darkness. Thunder rattled the glass, and I froze, my old fear of storms clawing at me. Mom used to hold me through them, her ring glinting as she stroked my hair. Now I was alone, trembling in a stranger's world. A light flared, a flashlight in Elias's hand. He stood in the doorway, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, hair mussed from sleep. You okay? He asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I'm fine, I said, but my shaking hands betrayed me. He stepped closer, the beam catching the worry in his eyes. Without a word, he set the flashlight down and draped his jacket over my shoulders. It smelled of cedar and salt, and I hated how it warmed me. Storms scare you, he said, not a question. He sat on the floor, leaning against the desk, and gestured for me to join him. I hesitated, then sank down. The space between us, small, but charged. My mom used to sing to me during storms, I admitted, staring at the rain, said they were just the sky shouting, not something to fear. I miss her. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, My mother loved storms. She'd drag me outside to watch them, said they reminded her life was bigger than our problems. After she left, I hated them. Still do. I turned to him, his face half lit by the flashlight's glow. The vulnerability in his voice cracked something in me. Why do you stay so closed off? I asked before I could stop myself. You have everything, money, power, but you're alone. His jaw tightened, and I thought he'd shut down. Then he said, I trusted someone once, a partner, in business, and more. She betrayed me, sold secrets that nearly ruined me. Trust is a luxury I can't afford. The confession hung between us, raw and unguarded. I wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, but fear, of him, of myself, held me back. Instead, I said, I've never trusted anyone enough to hurt me. Mom taught me to rely on myself, but sometimes it's heavy. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, the storm outside faded. You're stronger than you think, Lila, he said, my name soft on his lips. It was the first time he'd used it, and it sent a shiver through me. The power flickered back on, breaking the spell. He stood offering me a hand, but I rose on my own, needing to prove I could. We should keep looking, I said, turning to the papers. But my heart pounded with something new. Fear, yes, but also a flicker of trust. The next morning, I found another letter, this one from my mother to his. I'm leaving him, but the ring stays with me. Forgive me. My stomach dropped. I showed it to Elias, and his face hardened, not with anger, but with pain. They knew each other, he said, voice tight. And they both ran. I wanted to argue, to defend my mother, but the evidence was undeniable. Our pasts were entwined, and so were we, whether I liked it or not. That night, as I stood in the kitchen pouring tea, he came too close, his hand brushing mine as he reached for a mug. The touch was brief, electric, and I pulled back, my cheeks burning. I didn't mean to... He started, but I cut him off. Don't, I said, sharper than I meant. I can't. I need to focus on the truth, Not. I stopped, unable to name the pull between us. His eyes darkened, not with anger but with understanding. "I'll keep my distance," he said, stepping back. But as he walked away, I felt the ache of his absence, sharper than any storm. The storm's aftermath left Seattle heavy with mist, the city's edges blurred like my resolve. A week had passed since that night in Elias's office, the air between us thick with unspoken truths. We'd uncovered more. Letters confirming our mothers had been friends, bound by a shared escape from men who'd caged them. My mother had fled an abusive lover, Elias's mother a controlling husband. The ring, a gift between them, symbolized their vow to start over. But the answers didn't ease the tension. They only deepened the pull I felt toward Elias, a man whose guarded heart mirrored my own. I stood in his office, staring at a final letter we'd found, one that shattered me. My mother had written, "If I don't make it, give my girl the ring. Tell her to stay free." She'd known she was dying, and I'd never known how fiercely she'd fought to protect me. Tears burned my eyes and I turned away, not wanting Elias to see. But he was there, too close, his presence a steady weight. "Lila," he said, voice low, "you don't have to carry this alone." I shook my head, clutching the ring in my pocket. "I've always carried it alone. It's all I know." My voice cracked, betraying the lie. I wasn't just guarding my independence. I was guarding my heart, terrified of what letting him in might mean. He didn't push, but his silence was louder than words, his eyes searching mine for something I wasn't ready to give. I fled to the guest suite, needing space, but the walls felt too tight, the city's hum too loud. That night I made a decision. I couldn't stay in his world, tangled in his pain and mine. I packed my bag, left a note, "Thank you, but I need to go," and slipped out at dawn, the ring still in my pocket. The bus station was a gray blur of strangers, my ticket to Idaho clutched in my hand. I'd go back, rebuild, keep my mother's memory safe. But as I waited, a shadow fell over me. Elias, coatless, hair damp from the mist, stood there, his face raw with something I'd never seen, fear. "You're leaving," he said, not a question. His voice was steady, but his hands clenched, betraying him. "I have to," I said, throat tight. "This us, it's too much. I don't know how to trust this." He stepped closer, not touching me, but close enough that I felt his warmth. I've spent years controlling everything, my business, my life, because I thought it kept me safe. "But you," he paused, his jaw tight, "you make me want to let go, Lila, and it terrifies me." His words hit like a wave, cracking the walls I'd built. I wanted to run, to protect the vows I'd made to myself, but his eyes held me, raw and open. "I've never let anyone in," I admitted, voice shaking. "Mom taught me to stay strong, to never need anyone. And I've never—" I stopped, heat flooding my face. The truth I'd guarded my whole life felt too big to say. He tilted his head, understanding dawning. "You've never been with anyone," he said softly, not with judgment, but with a tenderness that undid me. I nodded, eyes burning. I promised myself I'd wait, not for marriage, not for some rule, but for someone who'd see me. Really see me. And I'm scared, Elias, because you do. He exhaled, a sound of relief and ache. "I see you, Lila. Not just the ring, not just your past. You. Your strength, your fear, your heart. And I'm not asking you to give up your freedom. I'm asking you to let me share it." The station's noise faded, the world narrowing to him. I saw the boy who'd lost his mother, the man who'd built walls as high as mine, and I knew I didn't want to run anymore. But fear still clawed at me, a lifetime of guarding myself, of believing love was a trap. Then he reached out, his hand hovering near mine, not touching until I nodded. His fingers closed around mine, warm and steady, and something in me broke open. "Stay," he said. "Not for me, but for us. For what we could be." I looked at our joined hands, the ring in my pocket a silent witness to our mother's strength. I thought of Mom, her fight for freedom, her hope for me. Love wasn't her cage. It was her choice. And I wanted to choose too. "I'm scared," I whispered. But I stepped closer, my free hand resting on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "But I want this. I want you." His eyes softened and he leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. The world didn't vanish, but it quieted, the mist outside a soft curtain around us. There was no kiss, not yet, just the weight of his breath, the safety of his nearness. It was enough. We returned to his tower, not as guest and host, but as something new. That night, in the quiet of his living room, I told him everything. My mother's lessons, my fears, the vow I'd made to myself. He listened, his hand never leaving mine, and when I finished, he shared his own truths, the betrayal that had scarred him, the guilt he carried for his mother's loss. We didn't rush, didn't push past the moment. When he drew me close, it was to hold me, his arms a promise of safety I'd never known. The ring stayed in my pocket, no longer a burden but a bridge between our pasts, our mothers, and the future we were choosing. We didn't speak of love, not yet, but it was there, in the way he looked at me, in the way I let myself lean into him. The intimacy wasn't in a touch or a kiss, it was in the trust we'd built, fragile but real. Days later, we stood on his balcony, the city glittering below. I wore the ring now, not as a secret but as a reminder of my mother's strength, and mine. Elias stood beside me, his shoulder brushing mine, and I felt the weight of my old vows lift. I wasn't giving up my freedom. I was sharing it, choosing it with open eyes. "I used to think love meant losing myself," I said, my voice steady, "but with you, I'm finding who I was, always meant to be." The story of Lila and Elias reminds us that love, at its core, is about trust, about choosing vulnerability over fear, connection over solitude. Their journey, woven from shared pain and quiet courage, leaves us with a truth. Love doesn't bind us. It sets us free to become who we're meant to be. If this story moved you, hit the subscribe button to join our community of romance readers and listeners. Like this post to share the love, and drop a comment with your thoughts. What did Lila and Elias's journey spark in you? Your support keeps these stories coming.